I've been in the message. My parents came in either 1977 or 78, and attended the Branham Tabernacle from that time up until about a year and a half ago. Well, we had a Pentecostal background. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, so it wasn't that much different going to the tabernacle and being in the message, other than the doctrines. The dress was the same, dress codes, short hair for the men. Started to question it. John Collins had emailed me his first little booklet that he wrote, and the issues that he had in there. I got home from work one night, read these things, kind of just glanced over it briefly, and then went back later that night and really started to dive into him. And first thought, well, he's off his rocker a little bit, but then started really studying it and finding out that what he was saying was true. And that was the initial, the questioning, and then started to get in, onto the web a little more with Believe the Sign and the articles that they had written and the videos, and but it was just, I guess, a compilation of all those things. I guess probably the cloud is and that's probably a big one for a lot of people, but whether Brother Branham was even there in Arizona was a big one. And I've actually had people tell me, well, it doesn't really matter if he was there. To me, it does. If the man stood there and told us that he was there and he wasn't, I don't know any other way to say that than that's a lie. And if he lied about that, what else did he lie about? And that's what really, started my journey into looking into the other discrepancies. The evidence was just overwhelming. I think it was just the culmination of all those things that I started reading. The Man from Windsor was a really big one for me. That seems simple, but when you go down through the dates and you start comparing the things that he said, and it just, it doesn't make it couldn't be all those things, and there are so many examples like that, where Brother Branham tells about his wife Hope dying in the hospital, and this nurse that he said come into the room and was a good personal friend, and then if you do a search on that, he lists, like, was it 5 different names that he named this woman. It's like, to me it was just like he was making it up as he went, playing to the crowd, pulling at the heartstrings. But I think it was just when you start looking into these things, and it's not one or two things. One or two things you could dismiss. Well, he got that wrong. He just slipped up. But when you start looking at it as a whole, there's just hundreds and hundreds of things. And the other, I think when I really started looking into it was what he said versus what the Bible said. Where he talks about the reason that John wept, and then he just turns around and says, well, I don't believe the Bible says he wept because this, and this. And he turns around and says, I don't believe he did weep because of that. I believe it was because of this, and this. Yeah, no, yeah. And it's like, well, the Bible says he did. That's why he wept. Brother Branham put so much emphasis over the years, don't take one word away or add to the word. And simple things like the verse about consider the lilies, how they toil not, neither do they spin. And he totally changed that to consider the lilies, how they toil and spin. That makes that a whole different verse. To drive his point home. That's taken away from the word and making it what you want it to be. I worked at Voice of God for 15 years, from 1988 to 2003. I can only speak for myself, but working there, it's a business. It's just like going to your job or any other job. You know, you're expected to be there at 7 o'clock. You come in at, you start work at 7 o'clock. You have scheduled breaks. You go, everybody goes to lunch at the same time. It's very organized. But there's it's not like a spiritual experience working there. It's a job. You're there. There's no devotions or, in the morning everybody gets together for prayer. There's none of that. It's just you come in, you print books or make tapes or CDs, and just go on your way. I think if anything, it handicaps you to the point of you rely on, I've got a prophet right down the hall that I can just email a prayer request to. And I think, me personally, I think I went to that more than prayer and holding it up before God. It's just, I can get an answer in an email here in a few hours. Joseph Branham and Billy Paul Branham spent the majority of their time in their offices. They weren't out. If they had to go talk to a department head, you would see them. There wasn't this aura of, we're in the holy place. It was very average, just going to work, putting in your 40 hours and going home. It was like working any place else. And I think people have the perception that, you work at the Voice of God recordings. And it's not like that. People come and visit at Easter time, and there's 3,000 or 4,000 people there, and everybody's, I love you, brother, and let's have fellowship. And it's like that at the Voice of God one weekend a year. And the rest of the time, it's all business. You're there to produce books, print books, make MP3s, CDs. That's what you're there for. And it's, people argue and fuss and fight, and there's, inter-office gossip, water cooler talk, just like any other place. I think maybe as a new employee, the first few weeks, maybe you're overwhelmed a little bit. It's like, wow, I'm doing the Lord's work here, and it's a little overwhelming that way. And I started when I was 18 years old, so as a young guy and easily influenced, you get in that mindset. I think definitely you get, the mindset was probably why we didn't go to church so much, was when you're surrounded by, all you need is the tapes. Just say what's on the tapes. This is our absolute. Then you're surrounded by that every day, and that mentality. Then church gets put on a back burner. And I never was the Joseph deity of belief, but elevating him to the status of a prophet, that was pretty cool to be able to just sit down at my desk, type in an email, and it may be a couple days depending on if he was out of town or busy or whatever the case was, but you have that, it's like a cushion, and to lose that is, it was a little difficult. But I think ultimately walking away from that, and it took a lot of time. It took a few years to get to the point where I was even interested in church again. But once I did, we started attending a Christian church in New Albany, which is a couple towns over from where the Tabernacle is. And the difference in the feeling, the freedom of just being able to worship. I mean, I was at the Tabernacle from 1977 or 78 on up until a couple years ago, and that church is just spiritually dead. People always said, you come getting what you expect. Well, I knew what to expect, which was not much. You go in, you sing the same 4 hymns every time. They play some of a tape, not even all of a tape. Cut it off at the end. Sing one course of Only Believe, and you go home or go out to eat. I publicly posted on my Facebook page Kathy Jenkins' synopsis of the message. I worked at the Voice of God for 15 years. There was one employee from there, and it was a very good friend of mine that we were buddies, hung out with, grew up together, kind of coming up in the Voice of God. He's the only one that reached out to me. I think it all goes back to the fear. They're afraid to question it. And as I said before, there's no fear in looking to find your walk with God. You can't fear that.